It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc, and if you want to reach me, you can contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Well, anyone who listens to this show knows that I really try to cut through the noise and get to the facts when it deals with anything, particularly numbers, because these are things, the economy, all those types of things that really affect us as individuals, as Americans. And I have with us today Sheila Weinberg. She's the founder of Truth in Accounting. She joined us from last year. We had a great interview with her last year, and we are going to do it again. Sheila, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me. Last time we talked about the financial state of the states, and this time I think we'll talk about the financial state of the union and the financial state of the cities.
Absolutely. So, and again, Sheila, your interview we did last time had a lot of great feedback, and a lot of people really loved it. So we're going to get into this. Now, first of all, before we jump in, Sheila, I probably, for those that don't know, what is Truth in Accounting?
Truth in Accounting, we're a 501c, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit. And what we do is work to educate citizens about their government's finances. So we produce reports and do speeches to let citizens know the true financial condition of their governments.
Well, that's quite the endeavor for sure. And I know you're fighting a lot of agendas, a lot of the what I call the legacy media and out there. Why is it you guys do what you do?
Well, we just find it, really important because citizens, we feel, do not have the financial information they need to be knowledgeable participants in their governments. You might have people advocating for tax cuts or spending increases, but they don't know how much debt their government's in. And voters, you go to the voting booth, and we really don't believe they can make an informed decision even on who to vote for. I say, would if you knew that your governors and mayors and other elected officials, if you knew that they, instead of really balancing their budgets like they tell you they are, that they were going further and further into debt, would you reelect them? But citizens don't get that choice because they're not told the truth. They're told by the elected officials that we balance our budget. People think, oh, they must be living within their means. I'll have them do it again. And also, even if you think about it, to balance their budget, they're not truly balancing their budget. And to truly balance their budget, they would have to raise taxes, i.e. they might lose a vote, or they'd cut spending, so they might lose their vote. So they really don't want to be truthful to the public because they want to get reelected. So they just use budget shenanigans to pretend they're balancing their budget so they don't have to make those difficult decisions.
Yeah, Sheila, I have to admit, the first time we interviewed last year, it was really eye-opening to me because I pay attention to money matters as much or more than most people, I would say. And it was eye-opening to me, like you said, so many of the states and et cetera have balanced budget amendments in their constitution or part of their constitution, for example. Yet they, like you said, they play games. The one you told me about was, I think you told me about Illinois, which we all know is probably the worst state, where they said they have a balanced budget. It depends on how it's worded, but basically, if they have the money on hand, it's counted balanced. So they were short. I forget what you said. It was $200 or $300 million, I think. And so they borrowed it, put it in their bank account, and counted as quote unquote balanced, right?
Yeah, Illinois, they're the champion of not balancing their budget, but other cities and states do similar things. Illinois, the way their constitutional requirement to balance their budget says that your funds available have to equal your expenditures. So, I'll ask you, if you borrow money, doesn't that become available?
Yes, it becomes available, but then you do have to pay it back, and you have interest expense, right?
Yeah, so they can balance their budget by borrowing, and then they have a tendency to just not pay their bills. They might get a print invoice from their printer, And if they choose not to pay it during that budget year, they don't have to include that cost. They just put that into the future. And then the third one is they all the governments do this. They do not include all of their employee compensation in their budget. So it's only the checks that have been written. So if you think about it, employees, as you know, especially state employees who are unionized, they get salaries, they get current health insurance, they get a pension, and they get retiree health care benefits. Well, each period, government incurs those pension and retiree health care costs, and the employee earns them each period. But to balance their budget, they just push those costs onto the future. So again, they can say their budget's balanced, but they're charging things to the taxpayers' credit cards.
Yeah, so they're not counting their future liabilities, in other words.
Well, I wouldn't call them future liabilities. These are, look at it kind of like it as a credit card. Just because you have chosen to pay this in the future doesn't mean that you don't currently owe the bill. So, they just ignore their credit card balances, their unfunded pensions and their unfunded retiree health care, and they just pay whatever they want to. And most surprisingly, a lot of people focus on the pensions. The pensions are vastly underfunded. Well, the retiree health care benefits, which are once you retire, the state or city still picks up your health care. Those benefits are not funded at all. Most governments handle those as a pay-as-you-go basis. So if you think about it, there are people retired right now who you're paying for their health care, and they never even worked for you. They worked for people in the past. And all of this is a way to get reelected, to pretend their budget's balanced when it truly isn't. And again, if they had to raise taxes to properly fund those pensions and retiree health care benefits, they might not get reelected. So it's a way they've figured out, keep the employees happy, but I don't have to make the voters unhappy by pushing all this cost into future taxpayers.
And so obviously, if the voters understood the real costs of these promises that they made, there would be a different outcome, obviously, in many of these elections.
Yeah. And, Illinois is a notoriously one-party state. And would that be the case if people knew that, like the governor here, he balanced the budget. He borrowed $3 billion from the Federal Reserve. Again, borrowed money becomes funds available. He shorts the pension plans. Again, think of the pension plans like on your credit card. You have to pay them at least the minimum balance every month. Well, he doesn't pay the minimum balance. He shorts the pensions by $5 billion a year, claims the budget's balance, and you do personal finances. You can imagine if you don't pay the minimum on your credit card, what happens? And the interest grows.
Things get ugly really quick.
Yes, and in Illinois, things are really ugly. And it's happened slowly, but it's happening faster all the time.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah, when you compound interest, I always tell them compound interest can work for you and against you if it's compound debt. And like you said, it works slowly at first until it starts working quickly.
Yeah.
So you recently came out with the State of the Union finances. So give us a few highlights on that, Sheila.
Well, the financial State of the Union we do on a quarterly basis. The reason we do this is because people will hear the official debt, which unfortunately is reported to be $30 trillion, 34 at this point. But people don't know that not included in that number are the Social Security and Medicare liabilities. The federal government does not include those as a true debt, which we can discuss later. But if those numbers are included, instead of the 34 trillion, I hate trillion, the government actually has unfunded bills of $154 trillion. You have to add another $120 trillion to the bills. And if you divide that by the number of taxpayers, and keep in mind that this works out to be about the number of households, it's almost $1 million per taxpayer. And what that means is in the future, taxpayers are going to have to pay each one of them $1 million more in taxes, and they're not going to receive any goods or services for those. Those are benefits and costs that have been incurred in the past, and those are going to have to be paid in the future. We do give the federal government, believe it or not, an F grade. And the reason we started issuing grades is because we wanted to counter what the credit rating agencies were doing. You know, the federal government still has at least a AA credit rating, and so people think, oh, their finances are fine. But the credit ratings, unlike most people think, especially elected officials, do not take into account the true financial condition of a government. The credit rating is only the risk on whether the bonds are going to be paid. So the government is issuing bonds. Are those bonds over the period of that they are due, are those going to be able to be paid? And keep in mind that bonds are paid out of the first dollar collected. So it's highly likely that the government will pay these bonds. But it doesn't look at the risk to the taxpayers. What's the risk to the taxpayers that government is going to have to raise taxes and or cut spending and benefits, or just even go into bankruptcy? So we added grades to our financial state of the union, financial state of the states, and financial state of the cities. And the federal government gets an F grade.
That, when you look at all the debt and all the promises, and it's not surprising that they get the F grade. But I find that interesting, Sheila. Like you said, a lot of people look at the credit agency ratings, and I didn't even consider that myself. Actually, is you're right. It's they're rating the likelihood of the government paying the interest on those bonds. Not really, are they going to be able to, fund all these promises that they've made?
Yeah, and we find, like, especially it's very powerful in the state and local governments. For example, Vermont was upset that elected officials there because we gave them an F grade, and the bond rating agencies are giving them a AAA grading. And it's like, well, hold it, we can't get an F grade if we're getting a AAA rating. It's like, no, you're looking at the credit rating as a scorecard of how well you're doing financially, how good, the financial condition of your government. And, I've talked to people from the credit rating agencies, and they're like, no, that's not what those credit ratings mean. They're just the risk on whether those bonds can be paid or not paid.
That's very eye-opening, Sheila. So I'm going to encourage folks there. She's got some information that I was not aware of about Social Security that I'm going to ask Sheila to share with us in the next segment. I'm going to really encourage you to stay tuned because this will be super eye-opening. Of course, if you want to contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. But stay tuned next segment. You're going to not want to miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference, and if you want to contact me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Today we have Sheila Weinberg, with the founder of Truth in Accounting. He's been sharing some very eye-opening information about the state of the union and the state of the states, in fact, in terms of their financials. So, Sheila, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sorry to bring people the bad news, but you do need to know the truth.
Well, you're a CPA, right? That's your job.
Yep, that's our job.
I always tell people when I meet with them, I'm talking to them about financial stuff. I said, well, if it is good, not necessarily good news, you want me to tell you what you want to hear or what you need to hear, right?
Yeah, well, people need to hear this. Unfortunately, the government officials do not want you to hear this.
Yes, and I think you're absolutely right. The mission of your nonprofit, Truth in Accounting, really is to educate and help people make better financial decisions for elected officials and et cetera, correct?
Yes. Again, so, like California, Governor Newsom was saying, hey, we're running a surplus. So Everybody thinks, oh, they must be doing great financially. But they're the worst, they're the worst state as far as the dollar amount of their debt. They have more than $200 billion of debt, even though
And
they
that's
say they have a surplus.
well, yeah. Actually, I saw recently they have a $77 billion shortfall.
Yeah, and it's amazing how they have surplus one year, then it switches, and all they're doing is looking at here's how much cash we got in versus how much cash we expect to spend. They don't look at their overall debt, and it's kind of like the federal government where I was shocked when I first got into this that they do not include Social Security and Medicare as a liability on the federal financial statements. I'm like, what? That can't be correct.
Well, here's the point you made. I was reading through the highlights of the State of the Union that you guys just put out, and this caught my attention, Sheila. So as you pointed out, they don't count the Social Security and Medicare liabilities, which are like 50 and 60 trillion dollars each. And the point you made here, they don't count them because recipients, and folks, you want to pay attention to this. This is eye-opening to me. It says Social Security and Medicare recipients do not have the right to any benefits beyond the benefits to be paid next month. And there's laws to reduce or stop future benefits can be passed at any time. Hear more on that, Sheila.
So I testified before the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board. This is a board that makes up accounting standards for the federal government. Surprise, surprise, it's controlled by the federal government. And they were debating on whether they should include Social Security and Medicare unfunded liabilities as a liability. And the chief actuary of Social Security testified before me, and I'll read a couple quotes that he made. He said, benefits are not directly related to or committed upon the receipt of earnings or the payment of taxes. So what that is saying is, even though you think that Social Security and Medicare is being taken out of your paychecks every pay period, that doesn't mean that you're entitled to benefits.
And Sheila, that's including the money you contributed, right?
That's right. So and keep it so. And what they're saying is you are not contributing into the plan. That is a big. I'd say that the federal government has done a marvelous job of brainwashing the people into thinking that they contribute benefits. They contribute into the plan and they're going to get that money back. The federal government believes you are not contributing into those programs. And in fact, they're saying, even though you, quote, believe that, and even though you pay taxes, you are not entitled to any benefits.
So no, they're just looking at it as another tax.
It's another tax. And the issue that I have with it being another tax is that young working people, say you have a family of four, the couple makes $70,000 a year, and these Social Security and Medicare taxes are coming out of their paychecks. And some of those taxes are going to people who currently receive Social Security and Medicare benefits who have a higher standard of living than they do.
Oftentimes far higher.
Far higher. And some people say, well, we should means test it and make the wealthy pay. But is it morally correct to have somebody making $70,000 a year? They're barely paying their rent, barely paying their food, and then you have somebody who's in retirement who's making $100,000 and their house is paid off. They're going on vacation. Is that a moral thing to do? But
the argument I hear, Sheila, all the time, and you're so right. And even well, I paid into this, so this is my money I'm getting back, plus interest is the way they look at it.
Yeah, and again, that's part of the brainwashing is the federal government has told them that you're paying into this. And think about it, this is another hard concept because, again, people's brains are so wrapped up into how the federal government explains it that even though you're, quote, paying Social Security taxes, all of those taxes are currently being used.
Right.
They're used for current and proof of that is even with those taxes, we still have to borrow money. So those taxes are being currently used, and people are like, well, the federal government owes that money back. It's like, no, we're using all that money right now. They might be calling it Social Security tax, but they believe it's a pure and simple tax, and all of that money is currently being used. So the federal government says we don't owe you that back. The other quote that the chief actuary of Social Security said that an overriding uncertainty exists under the Social Security and Medicare programs. This is that the government's right and ability to alter potential future benefits until benefits become due and payable, i.e. next month. There is keep in mind, no binding commitment over which a worker has control, and no liability exists for the federal government. The worker has no control, even though they think they contributed. They have no control that they can get benefits because the Congress can change the law tomorrow.
And the recipients, obviously, they could change the law tomorrow, and the recipients would stop receiving.
Yeah, and when I testified, I said, well, okay, if I don't win the gay and have you record this as a liability, and it should be a liability because us nerdy accountants, a liability exists if you can estimate how much the liability is, and if it's probable you're going to pay it. The trustees estimated, I have a trustees report, trustees estimated, and if you go to the American public, people will say, yes, it is probable they're going to pay it because they have promised it to me. So it should be recorded as a liability. But I said, if you don't record it as a liability, I think you need a massive education campaign to let the American public know that you do not owe them any Medicare or Social Security benefits. And quit sending out those social insurance statements of here's how much you're going to receive. It's like,
yeah, I've received I mean, we all do. I've received those estimated how much I'm going to receive when I retire.
Yeah,
that sounds like a promise.
Well, and what they'll point out is you're looking at the wrong thing there. You're highlighting the numbers, the big numbers that they put at the top. You need to read the fine print, and the fine print says Congress can change the law at any time, so don't, in essence, count on these benefits. So as people are doing their personal planning, I would say don't count on these benefits. That if you get them, it's going to be gravy, but I would not count on these.
Sheila, that's tough because I've been going by, that's way tougher than I've been saying, but I think you may be right. I've been going by the most recent Social Security trustees report, where they're sharing that in roughly 10 years, if nothing changes, that they'll be able to pay out 77% of current benefits. So what I've been telling people is, hey, expect a 23% pay cut on benefits, because that's what the trustees are telling us. And if it turns out to be better than that, well, that's gravy. But you're saying it's possible there could be little or no benefits in the future.
And what you're doing is, but you're going based upon the trustees' reports and how much money is in, quote, the trust fund. The trust fund, what it is it's the amount in the trust fund is, here's how many Social Security dollars we've ever received, and here's how many Social Security benefits we've ever paid from the inception of time. Reading from the Federal Financial Report, it says that you work with trust funds, I assume.
Yeah.
And trust funds, it says that in the federal budget, the term, quote, trust fund means only that the law requires a particular fund to account for the money separately. So here's the money we got, here's the money we paid, and used for a specific purpose. A change in law may change future receipts and the terms under which the fund resources are spent. In the private sector, this is what you're used to. In the private sector, trust fund refers to one party hold and manage a second party's money in a fiduciary capacity. That's not the case under the trust funds of the federal government. The federal government has no fiduciary responsibility to pay these monies back, anything. It's only called a trust fund because that's what Congress decided to call it. it is not equivalent to a trust fund in the private sector.
Interesting. So they're taking our money, quote unquote, promise we're going to get X amount of benefits. But at the same time, they don't promise anything and say they're not liable for anything.
Yeah,
and there's no fiduciary requirement for them or anything.
And you're saying that, well, the money's going to, the quote trust fund balance is going to run out in 2023. Well, another quote from the Office of Management and Budget says trust fund solvency is not a meaningful measure of the government's ability to pay future benefits.
Well, it's 2033, by the way, is what the trustees report is saying. But yeah, wow.
And that.
So, folks, I'm gonna have Sheila share some more of this because this is really eye-opening, coming from from a CPA, and really looking at the real numbers. And I'm gonna encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment because I got a few more things on Social Security that I think is going to be eye-opening because this is something that so many people rely on and it's so important. And you need to know the facts so you can make better financial decisions. If you want to contact me for help you navigate all this, yourpersonalbank.com. I'll be happy to talk to you. Stay tuned in the next segment. You are not going to want to miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference, and we're having an outstanding show today with Sheila Weinberg, founder of Truth in Accounting. She's kind of laid a truth bomb out about Social Security. If you missed it, I'm going to encourage you to go to our website, yourpersonalbank.com, because you can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows anytime you want. But I'm going to have Sheila share a little bit more about this because Social Security and Medicare are two of the biggest programs the government deals with, obviously, and so many people rely on this for their retirement or supplement their retirement. So this is hugely important for so many people. So Sheila, first of all, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So what you were sharing about, and I'm going to have you repeat this, but I want to share one thought here. There's something I recently, and I was sharing on a previous show, and I want you to kind of bring your thoughts into this about Social Security. And when it was first started, it was promised to us by the government that it would be completely voluntary. Of course, that's changed. Then it was promised the participants would only have to pay no more than 1% of their income. Obviously, that's changed. Then they promised that the money put into the program would be deductible from their income tax purposes. Of course, that's changed. Then they promised that the independent, quote unquote, trust fund would be separate from the general fund. Of course, that changed and the Congress spent it. And then the last one, they promised that the payments if people would receive would never be taxed as income. And of course, depending on your income, that has changed. They've made 5 promises and lied about them or changed every step of the way. My point is, why would you trust anything they say today?
Yeah, and again, they're saying that you're going to, that the money's going to last when there's no money in those trust funds. I think David Walker made the best statement about trust funds. He said, the trust fund, Social Security trust fund is neither funded nor can it be trusted. And that's David Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States.
That's powerful. And,
yeah.
And I want you to repeat what you said in the last statement for those that missed it. I've been sharing from, like you said, the Social Security trustees report stating that benefits would be able to pay to 77% starting in a decade, assuming nothing changes. You're saying it's worse than that.
Yeah, no, they're doing it based upon that there's currently money in the trust fund. There's currently no money in the trust fund. All of that has been used for current goods or services. And the reason they don't record it as a liability is because Congress can change the law at any point in time. So even though they're saying, well, in future years, we're going to, pay money, that they could change that law at any point in time. So I would, if I was doing, when I do financial planning, I do not count on Social Security and Medicare benefits because those can be taken away at any point. Right now, I think they're kind of protected because you have a larger population and you have the AARP who's protecting them. But once these benefits get higher and higher and people understand the true, in essence, Ponzi scheme that they're doing with this, will the younger generation, will future Congresses be willing to continue to pay these benefits again when people have thought they contributed money, but all that money went to pay current goods or services, and the young people, the younger future Congresses might just say, you guys got money, you got money and benefits for that money already, so we're not going to give you any, we're not going to pay you back because you already got money for
Yeah,
those.
right now politically it's like the third rail, like they say. They won't touch it because they're going to get. But I think the math, the money eventually will catch up and will be forced to make cuts. And my opinion is the politician will say, well, it's not our fault. They'll point to the trustees or whatever, and they didn't manage it right, or who knows what they'll say. But it's not our fault. We can't control it. That's the math, and you'll get less benefits or potentially no benefits.
Yeah, what we find in the state and cities is in relation to their pensions is that they're just like, well, prior elected officials promised these and we can't do anything about it now. And that's why I think people have to kind of pay attention to their current budget processes at the federal level, at the state level, at the city level, is because these benefits are promised and then in most cases they can't be taken away. So and then government expands for future programs. For programs they like to expand, and so if you have and taking away a program and making it smaller, that's hard to do. So if you can't shrink other benefits, you can't cut the pensions, what is the third option? Which is to raise taxes. So things that are going on now are going to, like right now, our governor is proposing that the police and firefighters should get more benefits.
Yeah, they like to pull those out to kind of give the sob story and go after the low hanging fruit, I guess, for people. Most people support police and fire. I do too, but at the same time, if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. If you're broke, you're broke, right?
Right. And in the coming gubernatorial race, he's going to get the votes of the police and firefighters, but then the future taxpayers are going to be stuck with those benefits.
There's one other thing here I saw, Sheila, on the State of the Union I thought was interesting. And like you pointed out, last year's budget deficit, I've been sharing this so often that they had a deficit of 1.7 trillion, and I've been sharing where the federal government brought in about 4.4 trillion in revenues last year, and they spent about 6.1, which is the 1.7 deficit that they reported. But you're saying their financial condition worsened by 7.9 trillion.
Yeah, so they're using.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they're using, in the media, this again is, where people are told these numbers, and the true numbers are even worse. You're told that the deficit was 1.7. Well, if you look at the audited financial statement, these are not my numbers, these are the audited financial statement. It shows that, revenues increased by 4.5, revenues were $4.5 trillion, expenses were $7.9 trillion. So the true deficit was $3.4 trillion, not the 1.7. And then if you go to the Medicare and Social Security trustees reports, you'll find that those liabilities increased by $4.5 trillion. So the net position of the whole government declined by $7.9 trillion. And that's
in 1 year.
Yeah, in 1 year. And that's, that's what, 5 to 7 times more than what they're telling you.
And that's why we're also starting to hear the whole thing about the overall debt increasing by $1 trillion roughly every 100 days.
Yeah, you can go to our Truth in Accounting website and watch the debt clocks just spin. Here's what the federal government is reporting, and here's what we're reporting, what the true deficit is, and those are spinning, faster than you can imagine.
You'll love this. I guess I'm not a CPA, but I guess I have the heart of one because I used to do workshops. We're talking over a decade ago, and I would open my workshops up with showing the live debt clock, and people were shocked back then.
Yeah.
And like, in fact, I'm looking at this your taxpayer burden, for example, here showing in 2008, the average taxpayer burden was like 413,000, and now it's close to 1 million, so it's doubled.
Yeah, it's growing, and when I started this adventure, for lack of better terms, in federal budgeting, I worked with a group called the Concord Coalition, started by former Senators Warren Rudman and Paul Tsongas, and we were very concerned about deficit spending. But looking back, those were the good old days. It was, I hate to say, only $200 billion a year. Now $1 trillion is just it's mind boggling to
That's one
think.
season. $1 trillion is just a season, right?
Yeah, it's like, really, really. And one other thing that happens is, and I think that they're in this position right now, is you'll hear that they'll have budget debates, and that they're about to reach the debt ceiling, and they will resolve that by suspending the debt ceiling. And people are like, oh, good, things are fixed. Well, what that means is, think about it as a credit card. You've reached your credit card limit, and the bank comes and you say, well, could I just raise my credit limit? And the bank comes back to you and says, yeah, we'll just go ahead and spend whatever you want to. And that's what the suspending the debt ceiling means. It's they don't have a limit. They can just go up as high as they want to.
Yeah, I was sharing that some time ago. I was incredibly frustrated when they just removed the limit. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's like, it sounds so, that's not that bad. They just suspended the debt ceiling. They fixed it. It's like, no. That's the worst thing they can do.
They just gave themselves a free get out of jail free card and just spend whatever the heck they wanted to, not worry about it. So, okay. So I'm going to encourage, I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment, the last segment here with Sheila. I'm going to ask her a few questions about what from her perspective and the experts she talks to, with all this debt, everything is going on. It's clearly unsustainable. That's obvious. What does she think is going to happen? And we'll just try to discuss a few things that maybe an individual, what you think, Sheila, what you could do going forward. So again, I encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment. If you want some help on managing or thriving through this, what I believe is coming economic debt crisis we're going to be dealing with. I mean, my gosh, Sheila, I'll just say this. If we have to start planning for people to not potentially accept any Social Security or Medicare benefits, that is seismic. I mean, that changes everything. So this is huge, folks. I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment. Don't miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferens. For more information, contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferens Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferens Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferens. If you want to contact me, you can reach me at yourpersonalbank.com. We've had a very interesting show today. I've been interviewing Sheila Weinberg, founder of Truth in Accounting. She has laid some serious financial truth bombs, particularly revolving around government spending and Social Security and Medicare. But Sheila, thank you for joining the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad I get to educate your listeners.
Well, we're glad to have you here. we've been discussing a lot of the financials. They're not pretty with the federal government, states or the cities for that matter. I guess my question to you is you deal with a lot of people. You're a CPA by trade. What do you see as where do you see us headed? What do you think is going to happen most likely?
Well, I don't think it's going to be pretty. I'm looking at a quote from the federal financial statement again from the auditor of the federal government, which is the Governmental Accountability Office. And, there's a quote in their report that says, they and the Congressional Budget Office, they prepare long-term fiscal financial simulations, what's going to happen. And their conclusion for both of them is the same. Based upon the current revenue and spending policy, the federal government's long-term fiscal path is unsustainable. So when something can't go on, it is going to stop. And I guess what I would recommend is people make sure that, they have the means and the wherewithal themselves that, to go into retirement or even personally to have as much savings and because they're going to get to a point where, you can't count on the federal government to cover to pay the benefits that people are used to these days.
So what you're saying is people should be prepared to expect less Social Security or Medicare benefits, certainly, and even potentially none.
Yeah, and also, just other government spending.
Sure.
There is on our website, truthandaccounting.org. I have 2 doomsday scenarios, and one of them is death by hyperinflation. And I think that we've started to go down that road, haven't we? The U.S. Treasury, is selling bonds. They're writing the Federal Reserve has a lot of Treasury bonds on their balance sheet, so they're creating money, and as they create money, that leads to inflation, and as the government needs more money to pay its bills, then without corresponding economic growth, then inflation happens some more, and you get into a inflation. I think we're at the beginning of this inflationary cycles, which will continue to happen more frequently. And then the value of the dollar will decrease. So workers won't be able to, we're already finding this. People can't spend, they'll have to use more and more of their dollars to buy clothing, housing, groceries.
Right.
Retirees they've saved a lot, but those dollars will be less valuable. And eventually the dollar, might become worthless. And foreign people will buy those up, and the banks will have to cancel all the credit cards, and Americans, will be without, will have to spend the you've heard of the $1 trillion, we might be at the $1 trillion dollar bill. We might be at that point.
Yeah, that's pretty. That's pretty harrowing when you think about. But at the one point, I understand what you're saying. I think it also then, as bad as it sounds, it creates an opportunity because, like you said, the government keeps spending more, which means they keep selling more bonds, which pushes bond returns up. So I mentioned earlier, there's a Vanguard article came out just recently predicting that bond interest rates will be strong for the next, increasing, in fact, they said, for the next 5 to 10 years. That's what they expect. So if you're invested in something that's interest rate sensitive, certainly that type of investment might thrive in the next, say, 5, 10 years, if that's the case.
Yeah. Yep. Those. Yeah. But the bottom line is, the government is, if it's unsustainable, they're not going to be able to continue to spend at the level that they are. And I have talked to a couple of accountants who were, one was in Venezuela when everything went bad. One was in an Eastern European country. And they said that there were a few people like us, very few, like Truth in Accounting and you, who are highlighting this issue, but, nobody was paying attention. And they said, things were getting bad, but it was an overnight thing. If you think of the housing market crisis, it was an overnight thing. It wasn't a soft landing. And, if the federal government, if we say a third of the budget is currently borrowed, well, think about it. If they couldn't sell bonds, then they would have to cut a third of the spending right away.
Right. So if
And
you're receiving benefits, a third of your benefits are going to go away as a result.
yeah, or if you're counting government for, lunch programs or housing or whatever, that could go away very quickly. And it could, they said it was not a soft landing.
Well, I saw something very recently. I think it was the Heritage Foundation. I'm not certain, but they did a million simulation determination to see if we were going to have a hard or soft recession coming up, and they came out with an 88% chance for having a hard landing, not a soft one, based on a million simulations.
Yeah, and I talked about one doomsday scenario. The other one, which I think we're having both of these at the same time, is it's called death by panic. And this is because of our raising budget deficits and ballooning trade deficits. The country is borrowing money from the foreign governments like China, like Japan, and this nightmare continues when we haven't, investors realize, which they are, that the federal government isn't going to come to grips with these deficits, and the world will lose confidence in the U.S. Treasury ability to pay their debt, and so then the foreign markets will, start selling the U.S. debts, and then we'll have to raise interest to usurious levels to pay this debt. And then still people won't borrow, and we won't have any way to borrow. So the government will shut down, and we can't write Social Security and Medicare benefits and checks, and life will be bad.
So so that all sounds horrible. But on the other side of the coin, I said, I have stories from even going to the Great Depression, where things that are guaranteed assets, I deal with, as you know, deal a lot of high cash value insurance policies, for example. They thrived in the Great Depression, for example, and the Great Recession, all these other times. So I guess if we do have a hard landing, obviously asset prices would drop, like we saw in 08, 09 with real estate, for example, or the stock market. There may be opportunities there. And if you have funds that are available because you've been able to accumulate that and it's guaranteed, not subject to risk, could create a tremendous opportunity for somebody too, right?
Yeah, there could be opportunity. Again, some people made a lot of money during the housing market crisis. So,
Paul Getty was a great example of that. He became a multi-millionaire in the Great Depression because he had money in insurance, and of course that didn't lose. It was guaranteed. Asset prices dropped significantly, and he was able to pick up a lot of stuff really cheaply. Warren Buffett did the same thing in the Great Recession. Picked up a lot of great companies on the cheap because he had money guaranteed. So although we may have inflation, like you said, hyperinflation, all these things, but when the crash comes, everything's going to, in essence, reset, right? A lot of it.
Yeah. But people just need to plan, and they, again, that's why we try to educate people about these numbers so that they can, plan for themselves and not sort of just be complacent. I was like, oh, well, when I retire, Social Security and Medicare will be there. It can take care of me. I don't really need to plan for my own retirement. Well, it's like, yeah, you do, because I would not count on those benefits.
Well, Sheila, you today have caused me to rethink a lot of the retirement planning scenarios I've done with a lot of my clients, because I've been basing it on the Social Trustee report, as we stated earlier. I've been saying expect a 23% cut, because again, that's what they're telling us. But now I have to consider it could be far worse.
Yeah, and I think we're already at the point where some of the Social Security and Medicare benefits are being paid out of the general revenue. And so therefore, again, if Congress decides that that's not where they want to spend their money, those benefits could be cut dramatically.
Well, I look forward to the day, Sheila, when you can share with me some good news, but I understand where you're coming from. So before we finish up here, Sheila, if somebody wants more information about Truth in Accounting, where they could go, you want to share that?
Sure. We have two websites. We have truthinaccounting.org, and then we have a data-z.org. There you can go and look at the federal government's data in detail. You can look at states, you can look at cities, you can look at individual pensions. and you can create charts. It's fun if you ever get a chance to go and create a chart to compare how your state or city's doing to other states and cities. It's a fun. We have more than 700 data points. So if you're thinking of moving from one state to another, I would take a look at it. Look at their financial condition. You can look at rents and housing prices and get a good idea on where you should move to.
That sounds great. So a lot of people are doing that. So as always, it's been very informative, Sheila. Really appreciate you joining us today and bringing to light the financial situation of our union, of our states, and our cities. And so people can have the facts, make decisions, plan accordingly, make better financial decisions going forward instead of listening to whatever the government's telling us or whatever the legacy media agenda happens to be for the day, right? So again, thank you for joining us, Sheila.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And as always, I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned next week to the Your Personal Bank Show. We'll have some more great information and hopefully help you navigate this economic chaos storm, whatever it may be we're dealing with. I firmly believe, like Sheila stated, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. I'll be happy to help you, again, thrive through chaos. And as always, as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.